Simon, also known as the Convict, was likely born sometime around 340 EIC, based on his late 30s looking appearance in 378 EIC. That date format might sound unfamiliar to you, and that's because EIC isn't a real-world calendar. In the universe of Ironlung, it stands for Epoch of Interplanetary Colonization, a calendar standardization that began when humanity established the first off-Earth colony on Mars in 1992 CE. Essentially, 340 EIC equals the year 2332 in our time. Our calendar is based on Earth's revolutions around the sun, but Mars takes 1.88 times longer to go around the sun. So they use a different calendar called the Interstellar Martian Calendar, or IMC. In this video, to keep things simple, I'll stick with the EIC calendar, which measures years based on Earth's orbit. So if Ironlung takes place on the 5th day of 378 EIC, and Simon appears to be in his late 30s, we can assume that he was born in the early 340s, basically about 300 years from now. He was eventually raised on Eden, the main space station for the Mars colonies, which is run by an extreme religious group. By the time Simon was born, humanity had already been living across the solar system for centuries. Mars had become the most populated planet in 143 EIC, and enormous space stations had been constructed throughout the system to support the growing human population. Very little is known about Simon's early life, but when he was 15 in the year 357 EIC, something happened that altered the course of human history, an event that would later become known as the Quiet Rapture.
Where's the reason for this quiet rapture? Too few to rebuild, too many to feed.
In Christianity, the rapture is the belief that at the end of the world, the faithful will be taken from the earth to be with God, leaving others behind without warning. This is found in Thessalonians, a text from the New Testament where believers are described as being caught up to meet Christ, and is often tied to themes of judgment, salvation, and the end of the world.
Why aren't we ascending into heaven? Oh, right. The sins.
Exactly what caused the Quiet Rapture remains unknown, probably the sins, but the effects were immediate and catastrophic. Across the entire universe, every known star suddenly vanished, and every space station lost radio contact with their respective planets. Over the following months, the surviving humans discovered that all known planets with sentient life, flora, fauna, a habitable atmosphere, or any sort of natural resources were gone. The only celestial bodies that remained were uninhabitable moons and drifting asteroids. In case you needed any more proof that Ironlung's Quiet Rapture is supposed to be an interpretation of Christianity's idea of the rapture, look no further than Christianity's Book of Revelations. Revelation, when the text describes the harbingers of end times. The sun became black as sackcloth, and the full moon became like blood. And this idea comes up several times in Christian texts, like in the Book of Joel and Acts of the Apostles. After the Quiet Rapture, 4 previously barren moons were found to contain unexplainable oceans of human blood. One of these, on a moon called AT5, is where we find ourselves in Ironlung, a literal representation of Revelation. Many theories were proposed to explain the Quiet Rapture, ranging from a sinister cosmic event to some unknown quantum anomaly. And of course, religious interpretations that viewed it as a literal rapture. Because I can't escape religious horror even when I think I'm covering something that has nothing to do with religious horror. The only survivors were the inhabitants scattered across a small number of space stations and ships orbiting the remnants of the solar system. Humanity had depended on the natural resources and ecosystems of the planets though. With them gone, food production became limited, industrial resources became scarce, and every remaining space station became essential to the survival of humanity. If you want to decipher the abstract images of Ironlung, solve the mystery hidden within the depths of the franchise's lore, and discover the truth behind Simon's ending, then stick around to the end of this video. Hello everybody, my name is CZsWorld and welcome to Horror History. Simon is the protagonist of the film Ironlung, which was written, directed, edited, and co-produced by Markiplier. The film stars Markiplier and was distributed by Markiplier Studios. It was based on the 2022 indie game of the same name, which was first played by Markiplier in May of that year.
Hello everybody, my name is Markiplier and I'm very tired. I'm gonna go into the ocean. And I'm going to... This is Ironlung. I meant to play this a long time ago, and then I got lost in space. If you haven't seen In Space with Markiplier, you should check it out. Link in the description. It's on my channel page. You don't check the front page of my channel every day, then you don't know what I'm doing.
We should check his page. Oh look, he made a movie. The original game, created by David Szymanski, is a minimalist horror experience set in a universe where every known star and planet has suddenly vanished, leaving behind only a handful of survivors. The player takes on the role of a convict, navigating a blood ocean by following coordinates on a map. The religious themes are there in the game, from concepts like the Quiet Rapture to direct references to New Eden, and David Szymanski, an overt Christian, has been known to include themes about faith in his work, like his 2014 game The Moon Sliver, his 2015 game The Music Machine, and his brother Johnny's horror comedy game game My Friendly Neighborhood. The film takes that same premise and expands it into something much more philosophical. The protagonist, who goes unnamed in the game, now goes by Simon, a name with religious connotations meaning to hear or listen. In the New Testament, Simon was one of the 12 apostles chosen to spread the teachings of Jesus, which will come into play later. The film is essentially a soft reboot of the Ironlung canon. The basic setup is the same, but having a main character that we, the audience, can see and connect to allows for a more personal story to be told. The game is experienced in first person, and the protagonist is more of a blank slate. So, in order to understand Simon, we first have to understand what Markiplier brings to the character. And if you know Markiplier, you know that's gonna be chaotic.
I'm done, I'm fucking done! Fuck you!
As I mentioned, the protagonist of Ironlung is nothing more than a blank slate of a character. Unless, of course, you are one of the 10 million people who watched Markiplier's initial playthrough before the movie was released. By showing his face cam in the top corner as he navigated a dingy submarine through a barely explored ocean of blood, he effectively created what we in the biz call transformative content, projecting his own fears, curiosities, and instincts onto the character.
We're fine. Oh my god, we're fine. What? What happened? Oh, I lost oxygen, I think.
Markiplier, whose real name is Mark Fishbatch.
Hello, everybody. My name is Markiplier, and I am a fish.
Has been vocal about what the movie's success represents for the YouTube to Hollywood pipeline.
But to not recognize from a business standpoint, the value of those audiences always makes me laugh. My objective here is to make it not weird, to give more YouTubers that come after me a chance to be taken seriously.
He's far from the first YouTuber to cross over, but I don't know if anyone's ever done it quite like this, where he's going beyond just adapting the game and actually adapting his own playthrough of it. Although the game and film are clearly meant to depict the same mission, there are some differences between the game lore and film lore. I have to cheat a little bit here. There's some game stuff that isn't in the movie, but we just have to assume that it's the same. For example, the computer terminal entries. We can't page through all the entries in the movie because it's a movie, it's not interactive. But the computer terminal is there, so I'm going to assume that the entries are still in there. Also, I had pretty much finished this script when I came across this quote, which vindicated my choice to handle the lore the way that I did. Roll it.
It's an adaptation that kind of expands it into a different direction, but not so different that it needs to be its own, separate thing with a different name.
Clearly, there's supposed to be some shared lore between the two. I mean, if I wanted to be strict, I could just analyze the original source material like I usually do in horror history episodes, but do you really want to see a character analysis on a blank slate character? I didn't think so. See, that's why I make the videos and you, well, actually, there could be creators watching this too. For all I know, Markiplier is watching this. That would be crazy. If you're watching this, leave me a comment, dude. But to fully understand the film, we need to flip to the Rapture aftermath, where political tensions were rising. In the wake of the Quiet Rapture, resources became scarce, and tensions began to rise between the surviving colonies, especially between Simon's home, Eden, and an organization known as the COI. The Consolidation of Iron, or COI, was a democratically governed coalition consisting of 3 space stations and 2 spacecraft. Their society was built on collectivism and mutual survival. Eden's population, on the other hand, maintained a strong sense of Martian identity and autonomy, refusing to submit to the authority of outside powers. This divide is reflected even in something as simple as timekeeping, like I mentioned earlier. While the rest of the surviving stations adopted the EIC calendar, Eden continued to use the Interstellar Martian Calendar, or IMC, an example of their refusal to let go of who they were. Their ideology differed as well. Eden's operations are motivated by religious faith and belief, while the COI leans towards science. And the clearest indication of that lies in Eden's name itself. In the major Abrahamic religions, the Garden of Eden was humanity's first home, associated with innocence and a closeness to God. It was designed as a paradise before the fall of man. In Ironlung, Eden's space station mirrors that idea. As the main station for Mars, it was the site of humanity's first off-Earth colony, another first home. Then, after the Rapture, another fall of man, Eden became a fragment of the past, trying to hold on to meaning in a universe where there may no longer be any meaning. For Simon and the other children of Eden, it was hard to believe that the stars had disappeared when they could still see them through the observation dome. One day, Simon spoke to the leader of Eden, who went by the name Father.
I can still see them. Stop saying they're gone. We can all see them.
From their perspective, the stars looked exactly as they always had. But Father explained to Simon that those stars were already dead. Light travels at almost 300,000 kilometers per second, but space is so vast that even at that speed, light still takes years to travel between stars. So when the Quiet Rapture erased the stars, their light didn't disappear immediately. Father explains to Simon that what he was seeing wasn't the stars themselves, but what he calls ghost light, growing dimmer every day. The whole concept is very similar to faith in religion, where you can't see proof of a higher power, you just have to trust that it's there. And in another parallel to the biblical paradise, the Eden space station housed the last remaining tree in existence, saved from the rapture due to its location in Eden's garden, or you could say the Garden of Eden. It's implied the tree became a symbol of survival to the people on Eden, taking on an almost religious significance. In Christianity, the tree also holds a deep symbolic meaning. In the book of Genesis, 2 trees stand at the center of the Garden of Eden, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The way Eden views the last tree suggests that it aligns far more closely with the tree of life, as it's a symbol of rebirth and hope. But there is also a link between the story of the tree of knowledge and Simon. The story of Eve and the serpent is one of deception and false choice. The serpent does not force Eve to take the fruit from the tree of knowledge, he tempts her, presenting it as an opportunity, yet the moment she takes a bite, her fate is sealed. This is known as the original sin. And the cycle of temptation and sin still goes on to this day, but at least the fruit of knowledge had value. Some of you are just messed up, man. But the idea also mirrors the situation that Simon gets himself into when he's presented with an opportunity, one that seals his fate the moment he agrees to it. At some point, the last tree died. It's unclear exactly what caused it, but the loss was devastating to the people of Eden. Their leader, Father, consoled them with the belief that the last tree will live again. When the last son of Eden joins the growth, there will be 1,000 trees. We may die, but when we die, our bodies will become the soil. By 362 EIC, political tensions between Eden and the COI grew. Simon, now 20 years old, joins a doomsday group called the Sons of Eden and helped them launch an assault on the COI's largest space station, the Filament Station. The battle appears to have been driven by ideological conflict and a desire to destabilize the COI. Following the death of the last tree, Eden's outlook had begun to shift.
It's all over, that's what Eden understands. At least they're not deluding themselves with some big future for humanity if we all just believe hard enough.
In short, Father began teaching the inhabitants of Eden that humanity's destruction would allow something new to emerge from it.
We will die.
We know that when we die,
When we die,
our bodies will become the soil.
So the COI's focus on preserving humanity stood in direct opposition to Eden's belief that humanity was not meant to be saved. Since Filament Station was one of COI's largest hubs, its destruction would weaken the organization's infrastructure and destabilize its ability to function. The conflict lasted 9 days, eventually escalating to the point where Eden troops resorted to sabotaging the station's reactor. Simon tried to prevent his brothers from going through with it.
I was the only one trying to stop it.
But nevertheless, the attack was successful, causing a critical breach that resulted in the deaths of 62 people and rendered the entire space station uninhabitable.
I didn't blow up Filament Station, but the ones who did aren't getting punished. Just me! I didn't get a choice! I just drew the short straw and then I traded one fancy metal box to die in for another, while people that I thought were my brothers abandoned me!
After the destruction of Filament Station, Simon surrendered to the COI authorities and was arrested.
I read your report, you surrendered.
We don't have any confirmation on how many other members of the Sons of Eden were arrested, but while Simon claims that he was the only one, we do see later that there was at least one other member arrested. Since there were so few places left that could support human life, the destruction of a station was one of the worst crimes imaginable, even before factoring in those who lost their lives. It's like moving from a tiny San Francisco apartment to a tiny NYC apartment, and also all your friends died. The COI had developed a new, humane form of criminal justice known as conviction realization. There were too few people left to justify killing prisoners or even leaving them rotting in a cell. So instead, they were offered the ability to repay society by providing services that benefited the community at large. This included performing surveys, maintenance, or similarly beneficial tasks. In 378 EIC, Simon is approached in prison and offered the opportunity to service his debt by piloting a submarine, the SM-13, through the Blood Ocean on a moon called AT-5, one of 2 moons under the control of the COI. 2 weeks earlier, the COI had concluded an exploration of the moon and discovered the Blood Ocean, the 4th known in existence. Despite ongoing research, no one knows for sure where the blood comes from or why it exists at all. But after further analysis, it was discovered that the massive body of blood was actually human in origin. The appearance of the blood oceans led some to develop theories that the oceans are in fact the remains of humans who disappeared in the rapture. Basically, that humanity was punished by God. Spoiler alert, as with most ideas in religion, there's no definitive answer by the end of the movie or game, but I do have a theory about what it represents on a character level. In my opinion, the blood ocean is actually a metaphor for the guilt that Simon feels over the deaths of the people that were killed on Filament Station. The fact that it's human blood only strengthens this argument, as he's literally being submerged in spilled blood as a punishment for sin. It's the literalization of the idiom, blood on your hands. Like the blood in you. Some things can't be treated, so don't make me be myself around you. Beneath the surface, the ocean floor is formed from layers of congealed material and trapped gas, capable of shifting violently under pressure. The result is an environment that is not only alien, but unstable. Investigators discovered a trench at the bottom with several points of interest, and they want Simon to search the coordinates and photograph what he finds. If he succeeds, the COI will consider this his penance and release him from prison. Driven by his desire to regain his freedom, Simon agrees, not realizing that by taking this deal, he is sealing his fate, much like Eve in the Garden of Eden. On 5/378 EIC, they have no use for months in outer space, so that's just the 5th day of the year in 378, Simon enters the submarine, also known as the Hema rover. And this vehicle is also nicknamed the Ironlung.
Beautifully. Oh!
The term Hema rover is derived from hemoglobin, the iron-rich protein in red blood cells that's responsible for carrying oxygen from the lungs to tissue. It's a fitting name for a vessel designed to move through an ocean of blood. The submarine is his only source of oxygen, and the oxygen gauge is the primary source of tension in the game, giving the illusion of a resource management mechanic. The nickname Iron Lung comes from the medical device of the same name used to help a person breathe when their muscles couldn't do it on their own. They were used in the 20th century, especially during polio outbreaks. Just like a real iron lung, Simon is trapped inside a metal chamber that's keeping him alive. He's completely dependent on it and can't leave it without dying. In the film, Simon is literally sealed inside.
You're welded in as tight as we can make it, and that ship's a tank.
Simon asks Ava, the captain of the vessel that the SM-13 will descend from, what they want him to find down there, as they've remained vague about the mission's purpose.
We don't know. You're the first one down. All we have are surface scans, that's why you're there.
But despite what Simon is told, there are already signs that he isn't the first. Anyone paying attention will start to notice the evidence that the COI is lying about Simon's submarine voyage into the Blood Ocean being the first such adventure. The warning about sparks and flames caused by voltage irregularities feels like a lesson learned from a past mission, not a theoretical precaution. The designation of the sub itself, SM-13, implies 12 others came before it. He starts off with a partially charted map, and in the sub's operation manual, SM-8 has been crossed off and replaced with SM-13. In the game, there's a terminal entry about the moon AT5, but if you try to access it, everything is redacted, implying that the COI doesn't want us to know about their past voyages into the Blood Ocean. By the way, the reason Simon misses a lot of these clues is because he doesn't bother reading the operation manual, which is almost certainly a reference to Markiplier's signature gameplay videos on YouTube, where he prefers to just jump into whatever game he's playing without reading the manual or playing the tutorial.
How even? I don't understand what I'm trying to do. What do you want from me, game? How do I even move?
Since light can't penetrate the density of the ocean, the SM-13 sub is fitted with an X-ray camera system mounted at the rear, which can be monitored from inside the sub. But he has to walk back there every time he wants to do it. If I designed the sub, I would just put the button within reach of the driver's seat. And this is the 13th one. I can only imagine how annoying the first sub was to operate. Anyway, Simon follows the coordinates he's given one by one, documenting the ocean floor. Each stop reveals something slightly different: strange rock formations, tube-like structures, and what appear to be the ruins of civilizations scattered across the seabed. Simon eventually captures an image that appears to show a large skeletal structure resting on the ocean floor. Confused by the discovery, Simon contacts the crew over the radio and asks what he should do if he finds something that isn't marked on the map. When he doesn't get a response, he continues documenting the area, but stops when he hears movement outside the vessel. Ava finally chimes in on the radio and suggests raising him back to the surface to inspect for damage and send him back if they don't find anything. But Simon refuses.
I'm done, so just bring me back up and throw me in prison. I'm not doing this!
Frustrated by Ava's dismissive tones over his dropping oxygen level and blood dripping into the sub, Simon tells her his concerns about what he found.
You just warn the next person that goes down what I found. There's something alive down there.
It seems that Simon doesn't initially grasp the concept that the camera he's using to document everything is an X-ray machine. It's similar to the X-ray machine you might see at a hospital, designed to look through blood and flesh to capture an image of the person's bone structure. So these skeletons in all these photos may not be skeletons at all. Simon already believes that there's something alive down there, so it's entirely possible that they've been looking at living or at least recently deceased creatures the entire time. But as usual, Simon is kept in the dark about what's going on. Which makes sense from the perspective of the COI. Just going down there was enough to scare Simon out of finishing the mission. They probably learned from experience that it's better if the pilots don't know that they're in danger of being attacked by giant blood-breathing leviathans.
I've seen a skeleton before. How stupid do you think I am?
Yeah, about that. And by the way, the concept of a Leviathan, or basically a giant sea serpent, also originated from biblical texts. In the book of Job from Christianity's Old Testament, the sea serpent is described as a terrifying, untamable creature, covered in impenetrable scales. It's presented as a force of nature beyond human control. Later references in texts like the Book of Isaiah present it as a twisting serpent or sea dragon, something that must eventually be destroyed to restore order. In the Book of Revelation, a beast emerges from the sea to oppose God, and while not directly named as the Leviathan, it closely mirrors the earlier depictions of sea creatures representing chaos. Ava ignores Simon's pleas to abandon the mission, claiming it'll be impossible to get him out as the sub has been welded shut. Despite the small number of survivors after the collapse, Simon is still treated with a clear level of dehumanization, and he's seen as entirely expendable. He's referred to only as convict, stripping away his identity and reducing him to a role rather than a person. Ava's crew equipped the SM-13 with a mechanical grabber arm, instructing him to ram the sub into the skeleton at full speed so the arm can collect a sample of the remains. Simon, angered by the fact that his safety doesn't seem to be a consideration, hits the X-ray camera button to take a photo, looking to get Ava's attention. This exposes her and 2 other crew members to intense radiation, with one of them immediately vomiting and being removed to the medical bay.
Are you out of your mind? I'm blasted with radiation.
Simon, just now fully grasping that this is no ordinary camera, is horrified by what happened, but ultimately turns the blame back on Ava.
Look, I'm sorry, but maybe if you had talked to me, this wouldn't have happened.
So, against his wishes, Simon is released back into the depths of the crimson-stained briny. Simon is returned to the Blood Ocean after Ava orders the sub to be released, and a different crew member tells Simon over the radio that he has 30 minutes to retrieve the sample before they bring him back up again. The X-ray camera incident is not something that's in the game, and it calls attention to the narrative parallel between this incident and the incident at Filament Station. This isn't the first time that people have been hurt because of something that Simon was involved in, and the radiation blast only deepens his sense of guilt. My theory that the Blood Ocean is a metaphor for Simon's guilt would help explain what happens next. From this point, the environment of the Blood Ocean becomes increasingly unstable, and the encounters get more aggressive. To drive my point home, the crew member on the radio tells Simon that Filament Station doesn't have to be the end of his story, that the Blood Ocean could hold answers for rebuilding. It's even suggested that Simon never fully believed in Eden's end times ideology.
It's not about the tree, right? Look, Eden gave me a tattoo. The COI made me burn it off. I didn't choose either of them. I still get a scar since the Quiet Rapture. None of us get a choice.
The tattoo once marked Simon as belonging to something, but when the COI captured him, he was left straggling between 2 opposing ideologies that he didn't fully subscribe to. When he says, since the Quiet Rapture, none of us get a choice, he's expressing a kind of cosmic nihilism. The idea that the universe has no inherent meaning or purpose, and that on a larger scale, everything we do is ultimately insignificant. He's not that different from the archetype that we often see in these religious horror movies, usually a Catholic father undergoing a crisis of faith. These stories often end with some kind of sacrifice to defeat the evil, where the protagonist is redeemed in the eyes of God. I certainly know my sanity is sacrificed anytime another movie ends up being a religious horror movie. We'll get to Simon's sacrifice later, but for now, just remember this. The Rapture took away more than just planets and stars. It stripped away the illusion of control. He didn't choose Eden, he didn't choose the COI, and he didn't choose to be sent back into the Blood Ocean. Simon is drawn to a panel marked with the Eden symbol, wherein he finds a small bracelet containing a single seed from the last tree sealed inside. Symbolically, the seed itself is associated with life and regrowth. In Christianity, particularly in the parable of the mustard seed in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus describes the kingdom of heaven as something that begins as a mustard seed. So when Simon finds the seed, it's a metaphor for faith, the idea that something small and insignificant can grow into an entire kingdom. In Matthew 17:20, that same imagery is used to describe the kind of faith required to move mountains, suggesting that even the smallest amount of belief can overcome impossible obstacles. In this case, the idea that humanity can sustain life again. Alongside the bracelet, Simon finds instructions to power on a monitor displaying a final message. "We won't be returning to the grove, brother. This is the only hope I can offer. I'm sorry."
This is not an expedition, it's an execution.
The voice suggests that even if the COI keeps their promise to grant him freedom, there's nothing to be optimistic about beyond that, given the state of the universe. I love this line.
If there is still hope, it lies beyond the veil. Hope in this void is as illusionary as the starlight.
And this is how Simon discovers that one of his predecessors gave up the fight.
They will get their execution. I will get my freedom.
This is the first time he has clear confirmation that he isn't the first convict to be sent into the Blood Ocean, but Simon is more optimistic, claiming he wants to live. And that's the contradiction at the heart of his character. He's someone who believes that the world is beyond saving, but he still has a will to survive, which is one trait that he shares in common with the COI. Eden and the COI just have different ways of going about their goals. Eden thinks that mankind needs to go extinct in order to be reborn as something new, while the COI feels that human survival can be achieved through scientific discovery. It's a classic clash of religion versus science. Simon puts the bracelet on and returns to the coordinates of the skeleton he'd seen earlier, only to find that it's moved a little bit further ahead. He takes another photo and finds the head of the skeleton, as though something had bitten through it. Despite his concern, Ava reassures him that the sooner he gets the sample, the sooner he can return to the surface, which he does by driving full force into the skeleton. Again, I think this is more evidence that this is not merely a skeleton, but rather a living creature that he's taking x-rays of and seeing a bone structure. Cause let's face it, ramming into bone with a claw is not going to collect a sample. I mean, like, maybe in the bedroom, ladies, but not here. Don't ram into my bone during a blood ocean. But when Simon takes another photo to confirm, he sees another creature that wasn't there before, and then this happens. This could be seen as an adaptation of this moment in the game when something outside seems to strike the sub and suddenly your coordinates are completely different. Players call this the teleportation event and have interpreted it as the creature basically smacking you or dragging you to a different part of the ocean.
Thank you very much, Houston, for listening to my last words as I die beneath the blood ocean.
See, we're at X 576, Y 355. That's quite literally impossible. How did I get here?
The impact knocks Simon unconscious, severing the line connecting him to the vessel above and dragging the SM-13 down into a deeper, cavernous section of the ocean. When Simon wakes up, he tries the radio but gets no answer, and after trying to emergency restart the sub, a fire breaks out in the hatch, which he has to extinguish. So, to review, he's been dragged down into the subterranean layer by what we can only assume is a biblical deity, and immediately finds himself dealing with a glowing fire. Given that this comes shortly after his admission of nihilism, I think this symbolically represents Simon going to hell, or being threatened with the prospect of hell. To further this idea, in the game, this happens when you reach the Y coordinate of 666.
666, confirmed. What is that? Oh my god!
Not to mention in the movie, he's constantly complaining about how hot it is inside the sub.
Why is it so hot in here?
Something you might say as you're getting closer to hell. Or a restaurant without air conditioning in the Dominican Republic. Some might say that's worse than hell. It seems like in Simon's case, he's getting a taste of hell, but maybe still has a chance to change his fate.
I'm dying down here.
Realizing his current coordinates are off the map he's been given, he tears a few pages from the Ironlung's operation manual and begins extending it, marking his position out of bounds as he attempts to chart the cavern. Using the camera to piece together what's around him, he sees the creature briefly appear and then disappear. We get a good look at it, and it clearly has a closer resemblance to an anglerfish than a traditional Leviathan like in the game. The behavior of this creature feels very intentional, like it's been manipulating Simon's journey. It lured him down by attacking and moving the so-called skeleton, and then cut the line, dragging the sub down into the caverns. There's a real-world parallel to this in the deep-sea anglerfish who use a bioluminescent light known as the Esca to lure prey towards them. By mimicking movements, they create the illusion that something is alive to distract their prey. As the hours pass, Simon begins to drift in and out of consciousness, and his surroundings begin to blur with hallucinations. Logically, you could attribute this to the decision to drink rubbing alcohol from the first aid kit to try to numb his pain. Don't try this at home because it can kill you, but before it does, you might experience dizziness and confusion. The website where I researched this said that if you're considering drinking it, you will not be judged and help is available. But that's a lie, because I'll personally be judging you for being an idiot. But you mix those symptoms with the radiation poisoning from the excessive use of the X-ray camera and the concussion he thinks he got from the sub impact, and yeah, I think it's totally reasonable to expect some wild hallucinations. But just like Simon's extinguishing of the fire could be seen as a representation of hell, I think the images he hallucinates symbolize him having a religious experience. He sees himself as a child, surrounded by dead bodies with blood on his hands. These could be memories, but we know Simon feels guilty for the tragedy on Filament Station, so it's more likely that this is a physical representation of that guilt. As he continues to take photos, one of the images reveals what appears to be a light in the shape of an eye staring directly at him. For those not familiar with the game, the eye is pretty much the most famous image to come out of it, and has garnered some pretty entertaining reactions.
What? Whoa. Oh!
Who's there? All right. Ah!
That last Twitch streamer I showed was having a subathon. Guys, a subathon. Simon labels the eye on the map as alien shit, but refuses to engage with it and moves on. But we'll come back to this soon. The next image reveals the wreck of another submarine named the SM-8. This discovery further confirms what he already kinda knew, that the COI lied about him being the first person to go down there. The computer activates and attempts to download the data from the SM-8's black box. If you aren't familiar with what a black box is, it's this device mostly used on airplanes that records flight data that can be recovered in the event of a crash to help investigators determine what went wrong. Turns out they're not black, they're actually bright orange. My childhood is ruined by knowing this fact, and now yours is ruined too. It's more rare for a submarine to have a black box, but given the danger of these blood ocean voyages, I can see why these submarines were equipped with black boxes. Despite connecting to the black box, Simon is not able to access the information without a password. For anyone who's ever been locked out of your account, this was the scariest part of the movie. Continuing to map the cavern just takes him in a circle, leading back to his initial starting point. Actually, he says he went in a circle, but the shape is not a circle. It looks kinda like an Evangelion mech, like he's just about to step on someone. Just me? Okay, never mind. Simon notices what looks like a second tunnel entrance in one of the archived photos and turns back towards it. But as he moves through the new tunnel system, the sub once again begins to rise and head for the surface. As Simon nears the tunnel exit, a woman's voice finally comes through on the radio. At first, he's relieved to hear someone, but that quickly fades when he realizes she isn't on the surface. The woman tells him that she's trapped in the wreckage of the SM-8, and with her sub damaged beyond repair, she begs for his help. This clearly doesn't make sense, because there's no way a sub from 5 voyages ago would still have oxygen, which makes it seem like he's communicating beyond the veil, or this is another religious experience. Remember, this character is named after the apostle Simon, meaning hear or listen, and he's receiving these messages through the sub's radio system. As his oxygen level drops again, Simon asks the woman to keep talking to him to keep him company so he doesn't lose his mind.
What would be the point? You'll just run out of air faster. Maybe that's for the best. Some of the others went that way.
Simon grows frustrated with her pessimism, but perks up when she shifts tone and begins talking about the light, claiming it is what caused the Quiet Rapture. She describes the light that spread across the universe as if nothing mattered. Despite being disoriented and not really sure what's real anymore, even questioning if the woman's voice is real, one thing is clear to Simon.
I just want to live. Is that so wrong? Why doesn't anybody else want that? Everyone at Eden just giving up.
And in his rambling, we find out the reason for his optimism.
You know, no one on Eden wants to think this way, but what's more likely? That every planet and star disappeared, or that a few space stations disappeared?
It's a key moment for Simon because it shows that he's trying to understand things on his own terms rather than just believing what he's been told.
If it happened, why can't it happen again?
After briefly disappearing, the female voice asks if he'd give everything to survive, and when Simon tells her that he never had anything to begin with, she gives him coordinates, promising answers and freedom. As he sets out, the voice from SM-8 asks if he believes in God, but Simon doesn't want to talk about it, since that's all he hears about on Eden. But like a true religious fanatic, she forces him to listen to her talk about it anyway.
An ignorant God sees a sliver of our universe through a pinhole and thinks it understands all that is and all that will be. And it will.
And why is that?
Because a God makes sense of what it sees, despite what it should be.
I'm reminded of the imagery of the eye that we saw earlier, looking at the sub from up close, kind of like someone looking through a pinhole, suggesting that the creature that he thinks has been stalking him is actually some kind of higher power.
What does it even mean?
The light, it illuminates and it blinds. It thinks, and therefore we are.
What the woman describes here is abstract, but frames the light that caused the Quiet Rapture as something godlike, not all-knowing, but something that only sees a fragment of reality and still believes that it understands the whole. And that sounds more like a human trait. We take incomplete information and try to shape it into something meaningful, something that we can understand, even if that understanding isn't entirely true. I mean, isn't that kind of why you're watching a horror history episode trying to unpack Iron Lung, the 2026 movie? As humans, we're always trying to make sense of our experience. Simon did this when he was trying to understand what happened to the stars and planets, and the COI did this by using X-ray cameras to chart the layout of the blood ocean, trying to make sense of this dense sea of red through a series of limited snapshots. So what the SM-8 woman is explaining is that understanding the truth behind the Quiet Rapture might not save them. So even if Simon learns the truth about the light, it doesn't mean that it'll help him. The light illuminates and it blinds. It sinks, and therefore we are. The sub reaches the coordinates, but Simon becomes uncomfortable when the woman's voice insists that there's nothing to be afraid of and begins to shift into a man's voice. And to make things even weirder, Simon notices the radio has been broken since the crash. He shouldn't be able to receive any transmissions to begin with. The sub begins to shake, and Simon hears a new voice saying, "I see you," as light breaks through a crack in the wall, seemingly destroying the vessel. The synchronization of the voice getting more angry and the sub being attacked seems to illustrate that Simon hasn't been speaking to survivors of the SM-8 wreck, but rather with the creature itself. Remember, Simon first heard the voice when he was almost out of the cavern. This was another plan to lure him back into the tunnels. We're then taken through this abstract vision, where he breaks through the surface of the ocean drenched in blood, watching the creature breach before disappearing again. He then sees the light again and hears it call his name, echoing phrases like "I see you" and "open your eyes." In religious context, the idea of being seen often carries a deeper meaning. It suggests judgment or the inability to hide your sins, and if the blood ocean is a metaphor for Simon's guilt and the creature is a deity of hell, basically an interpretation of Satan, then this moment could be his judgment for the sins that he's been grappling with. But the image of him being submerged in blood and emerging again could also be seen as a type of baptism. In Christianity, baptism is a symbolic ritual where devotees are submerged in water to publicly profess their faith to the religion. Baptism, or as I sometimes call it, the tism, represents a symbolic death and rebirth, a cleansing of sin and the beginning of something new. In many belief systems, blood is also tied to sacrifice and atonement, the idea that something must be given in order for something else to be redeemed or renewed. In the Old Testament, Leviticus 16, God instructs Aaron, the brother of Moses, to sacrifice a bull for his sins and a goat for the sins of the people. The use of blood was a way of cleansing the wrong. Simon's emergence from the ocean could honestly be interpreted as either of these two metaphors, or maybe a little bit of both. It can be read as a moment of judgment, where he's fully confronted with his past sins, or it can be read as a second chance for him, a sort of baptism where he's symbolically reborn with the sins of his past life erased. But in a literal sense, the strange imagery is only part of a vision, and as Simon regains consciousness, he sees a decaying humanoid sitting at the helm of the sub. Simon arms himself with a pair of scissors, only to find it's disappeared. This is one of the more abstract visions he has, and I feel like there are a lot of ways I can interpret it, but given that the shot matches the way that Simon turns around when he's at the helm of the sub, and the fact that it's missing a left arm, something that would later happen to Simon, I feel like this is a depiction of Simon himself. Markiplier hasn't said much about the meaning of specific moments in the film, but one thing he has said is that the film is all about perspective.
The story is very much about perspective and distorted perspectives and drawing conclusions from perspectives without all the information.
This whole time, we've only seen the story through the lens of Simon's character, and it feels like he's being treated unfairly. So to me, this moment illustrates why others see him as a monster. The creature is giving him a glimpse of how others perceive him. Broken and exhausted, Simon drops to his knees and cries. It feels like he's in a purgatory, a trap from which he'll never escape. But just as all optimism seems to be lost, he receives a glimmer of hope. Another radio communication, but this one comes from the surface. By some miracle, Ava's voice comes over the radio and tells Simon she doesn't know how he's managed to survive, as it's been several days since his last communication, and his oxygen should have easily run out by now. Which could be seen as a reference to the game, where you can't actually game over by running out of oxygen no matter how much you idle. Szymanski revealed in a Steam community post that it's not an actual timer, just a cosmetic thing to put more pressure on the player, since it would be annoying to have to start the game over every time you ran out of oxygen. I don't think there's an intentional reference to that happening in the movie though. My initial thought was that it had something to do with the blood slowly leaking into the sub. Oxygen is carried in blood by a protein called hemoglobin found inside of red blood cells. Under normal conditions, it wouldn't be released in a way that a person could breathe. But if we consider my interpretation that the blood ocean is an allegory for the lives lost because of Simon's actions and the guilt that he feels over that, you could start to look at the ocean as an entity in itself. An entity where oxygen might be carried by red blood cells. It starts to make sense when you consider the submarine that Simon is trapped in, the iron lung, is also named after a body part that takes in oxygen. In the human body, it's actually the opposite. Hemoglobin carries oxygen from the lungs to the rest of the body, but I still think there's an interesting parallel, and there is also more to the idea that the blood ocean is like a living entity, but we'll get back to that later. But as more and more blood seeps in, we do see the oxygen level go up again, so I think the oxygen is coming from the blood. Whatever the reason, Simon is alive, and when he hears Ava's voice on the radio, he bargains with her, convincing her to come save him because of the scientific value of the information stored on the SM-8's black box. Believing it could offer hope to the remaining survivors, Ava agrees to come down in the SM-14 and rescue him herself. In the background, we hear Ava arguing about this with another COI employee.
The SM-8 wasn't just another sub. We put equipment on it that we can't make anymore. Things that we'll never make again.
Look at me!
He is lying!
This is another interesting parallel between Eden and the COI. Even though the two groups are made out to be opposites in their ideology, they both have something precious carried over from the world before the Rapture. For Eden, it's the tree, and for the COI, it's their technology. By the way, this idea that the SM-8 isn't just another sub is reflected in a terminal entry in the game, seemingly written by a previous convict. What most people don't understand is that not all subs are built equal. The SM-8 isn't a burner sub. It's really for exploring and surveying blood oceans. If they send you down in an iron lung, they don't give a f if you come back, or if the sub comes back, because it's a pile of garbage and you're a piece of shit. You come back with photos, great. You sit down there and suffocate quietly, even better. But if they send the SM-8 down, one of the scientists is piloting, and they all expect them to return. And now the SM-8 is in the blood ocean in pieces. No, not hit a rock pieces or sprung a leak pieces. It looks like something tore it up. It's the longest terminal entry in the game, and it's implied that the COI doesn't really know that this entry is still on the computer. As I mentioned, we don't have free reign to peruse the entries in the movie adaptation, so we overhear this argument instead. The employee Ava is arguing with is named David.
David, this is bigger than us!
David is one of only 4 named characters in the film. My first thought was that it was a reference to the developer of the video game, David Szymanski, but given that the name Ava is very close to Eve, I wondered if David is actually more of a reference to David and Goliath. But I don't know what the side character has to do with David and Goliath, so maybe the names aren't significant outside of Simon himself. The only other named character is Jacksepticeye's character, whose name is Jack. He's one of the COI guys on the ship who gets injured by Simon firing the X-ray machine, and his name is obviously just the character being named for Jacksepticeye.
Top of the morning, Jellies!
Nope. Shut up, go work on your Bloodborne movie. As Simon sets course to the SM-8 wreck, he hallucinates memories from his past and voices in his head, including the creature warning him that it's following him. When he reaches the wreck, the computer connects to the SM-8's black box, and with the passcode Ava gave him, he's able to download the files. As the sub begins to fill with blood and fleshy material, Simon's physical condition starts to deteriorate. He coughs up blood, and when he removes his bandages, his skin is cracked and covered in boils. It's as though the sub's mutations mirror those of Simon's. A desperate sounding Ava comes back on the radio and begs him to retrieve his own black box data from the crawl space and get it to safety on the surface. When Simon argues that they had a deal that he would be saved, Ava apologizes and admits that she won't be able to save him.
Not everyone gets to be saved!
And of course, the idea of being saved carries a specific meaning in Christianity. It's the idea that a person's faith will get them into heaven instead of hell. So basically, it's saying that Simon is in hell and nothing Ava does can get him out. During their argument, Simon hears more psychic transmissions from the creature, telling him that he's brought Ava down to hell with him, just further confirming the idea that this descent into the blood ocean represents a descent into hell. As the creature holds Ava's sub in its jaws, it tries to drown out her voice by telling Simon that the black box can't reach the surface and that no one can be allowed to see the light again. The creature crushes Ava's sub, not only killing but absorbing her, which we later discover when the creature speaks to Simon, now using Ava's voice.
Our blood is on your hands. How many more bodies would you climb over to save yourself? Always thinking of the life you'll never get back.
This is something that there have been hints of throughout his interactions with the creature, which he experiences as the voices of the previous convicts, those aboard the SM-8, and the fragmented memories he's hallucinated. I'm saying hallucinated, but they may actually not be hallucinations. The creature in Iron Lung seems to be absorbing its victims and gaining their voices and memories, which explains why it was able to communicate using the voices of several SM-8 scientists before, and why it's always speaking in plural, with phrases like, "We are one in the blood." Earlier, I mentioned the deep-sea anglerfish that uses lights to lure in its prey, but there's another parallel to highlight. In some species, the much smaller male attaches itself to the female in a process known as sexual parasitism. And here I thought sexual parasitism was when the girl you're seeing starts asking you to pay to get her nails done or something. In anglerfish, the male fuses into the body of the female over time and loses its eyes, fins, and internal organs until it's almost absorbed by her and becomes an appendage. That seems to be kind of what's going on here with the creature in the blood ocean, only instead of fusing with a mate, it's fusing with the victims that it absorbs in the blood ocean. This is especially evident when you take a closer look at its form. Designed by concept artist Molly Brown, the 3D renderings show a body constructed from human remains, a head formed from multiple skulls, and a tail made from merged limbs. You can see this right on the movie poster as well, where the anglerfish X-ray contains what is clearly a human skull and spine. You can also see human pieces melded into the official popcorn bucket, which might be the first time in history that the popcorn bucket is canon. Making this powerful, hellish deity an amalgamation of pieces and body parts derived from mankind is another example of a god taking on human qualities, perhaps suggesting that Simon's ability to help save the human race isn't as far out of his control as it seems. Realizing the creature will likely come for him next, Simon decides that if he has to go down, he's gonna take this fish down with him. He rams the sub into the cavern wall, damaging the hull so that it will fail under the next attack. As the sub begins to fill with blood, he crawls through the hatch and removes the SM-13's black box, which he attaches to the life vest. But as he braces himself against the wall, the fleshy material begins to fuse to his hand, basically as if the ocean itself was trying to absorb him. And that's kind of what I was saying earlier. Simon, the creature, the sub, and the ocean are all one big entity. And that theory is bolstered by one of the distorted lines we hear from the creature.
Everything! Your ship is alive!
It's very abstract, but I think the message here is that God, man, and the universe are all an entity as well. Simon rips his arm free as he hears the booming voice of the creature telling him it'll find him. As more and more blood floods into the sub, he continues to mutate as his skin cracks and blisters. Faced with the reality that despite everything he has done, he won't be saved, Simon finally realizes that this whole journey did have a purpose, even if he doesn't make it out alive. He's come a long way from the hopeless, nihilistic Simon that we met at the beginning. The creature tells him it warned him not to try to save the black box and that it will never let him go. But in a final act of defiance, Simon intentionally damages the sub as the creature begins to attack it. In the next moment, multiple things happen. The creature bites down on the sub, Simon continues to mutate, and the seed bracelet breaks, resulting in the seed fusing with Simon's body. A tree erupts from within him, tearing through the vessel and killing them both. The last thing we see is the black box affixed to Simon's life jacket, floating up on the ocean's surface. So what does all of this mean? The COI and Eden both had different views about how to save humanity, and both of them are shown to have some merit. The father of Eden believed that humans must die off to become the soil of humanity's rebirth, and Simon's death sees him transform into this blood tree, a symbol of new life and hope for humanity. At the same time, Simon fights back against the creature in order to save the black box, which is implied to contain some vital information about the Quiet Rapture that will help the scientific community overcome this dire situation that mankind finds itself in. But, most importantly, well, no, I guess there's nothing more important than saving humanity. That would be ridiculous, but let's look at something that's important for this video. Throughout Simon's journey, I've theorized that the blood ocean has been tied to his guilt over the bloodshed that he felt responsible for. But now, that same blood takes on a different meaning. It becomes the foundation for new life rather than a reminder of what was lost. In religious context, blood is often linked to atonement, the idea that blood must be given to reach some kind of redemption. Red Dead Redemption. Sorry, that's a different game actually. But Simon's ending reflects that idea of atonement. While ironlung feels like one of the most faithful video game adaptations, pun intended, the biggest differences can be found in the creatures that oppose our protagonist. The game has two creatures that you have to contend with. One is the monster that hunts you throughout the game and in the end destroys your sub. And the other is the much larger, scaly-eyed creature, which is more in line with the traditional biblical depictions of a Leviathan, a long-bodied reptilian sea serpent that obviously has ties to the religious concept of Satan, who's depicted as a serpent in the Book of Revelation. The creature in the movie is without a doubt a different entity, taking the scariest parts of the anglerfish, melding in the human victims that it absorbs, and combining that with a massive long body that the designer of the creature describes as an eel. Other than giving the movie its own identity, the choice to meld real creatures into a horrifying antagonist rather than a full-on biblical parable approach fits in with the overall practical approach to the movie, where finding answers to the Quiet Rapture through science is a much larger focus and everything feels a little bit more real. But even with that added touch of reality, the wider world remains deliberately ambiguous, and the religious subtext remains stronger than ever through Markiplier's main theme of choice, perspective. I think this ties in with the concept of the game that started it all, where you never leave your submarine and your only window to the outside world is what you see in the photographs and what you read in the terminal entries. You just have to believe everything you see and read and try to make sense of it all. The same is true of religion. You'll never have proof of a higher power. All you have is the very limited scope of your own observations, which is kind of like the X-ray photos, and these Bible stories, which are kind of like the terminal entries. David Szymanski's message is that you can take that and choose if you want to believe. In the end, there are still a lot of things that don't make sense. Why did the radio speaker start working again? Was it being broken just part of the vision? Why would the last convict leave something as important as the tree sapling behind in the sub? But while I'm not forgiving these anomalies from a filmmaking perspective, it starts to make sense if you look at Iron Lung the same way that you look at a biblical story, where symbolism and meaning take precedent over story and logic. Despite this being another religious horror story, there ended up being a lot of depth. Pun intended. It's certainly in the top 2 for me when it comes to movies created by artists from a different medium outside of filmmaking that prominently feature a blood ocean in outer space.
In a world with no laws, the planets are being pillaged by space Vikings.
I know who you are!
And the oil rig where the haunted crypt of Mamingdala Falafel lies. And the love where it happened at Blood Ocean, coming soon.
This comes from a Metalocalypse Season 1 episode called Death Stars, where the metal band Death Clock makes their own movie called Blood Ocean. And considering how Markiplier set out to change the movie industry by completely going outside the studio system to make a #1 box office movie, the similarities here are almost uncanny. The old Hollywood machine even tried to censor Markiplier by artificially removing Iron Lung from the box office charts.
So this is funny. This is on Friday. The box office numbers. I'm #1, right? I milked it a lot. I said it. It was very funny. I knew that Sam Raimi's movie was going to pass me eventually by the end of the weekend, but I was like, haha, I'm #1. But then I didn't see this yesterday, but here's Saturday's. So this is Saturday, right? I swear I was on this list, but Iron Lung isn't here anymore. There's no numbers for Iron Lung. They took me off the chart.
You can just see the tribunal of old Hollywood gatekeepers planning that, just like in the Metalocalypse episode.
Supposing they do make a successful movie, what's the worst case scenario? Independent thought return. Creative control goes back to the artists. Actors become smart and cool again. Movies become thoughtful. Endings become hard to figure out. People go to theaters and interact with each other.
And considering Iron Lung leans heavily into cosmic nihilism in a universe where meaning has collapsed, the stars and planets are gone, and even in the darkest of times, the human race strives to explore and create meaning, somehow it kind of fits the bill. If you want to see more deep dives into your favorite horror movies, pun intended again, make sure you subscribe to CZsWorld for new horrors every week, ring the death bell and select all notifications, and I will see you in the next one. Assuming we both survive.